The cold came first, long before the trouble did. It crept across the plains like a quiet warning, frosting fence posts overnight and turning breath into pale smoke that hung in the air long after a person had passed. Folks in town said winters had always been hard, but that year felt different, sharper somehow, as if the land itself had grown tired of mercy. By the time the temperature dropped to 30 below, even the river stopped arguing and froze, solid beneath a skin of blue ice. Most people stayed indoors, feeding their stoves and waiting for spring like they always had. But on one gray morning, while the sky still carried the faint pink of sunrise, a mother and her young daughter stood at the edge of town with nowhere left to go. Their belongings fit into 2 worn sacks: a blanket, a tin cup, a loaf of bread gone stiff with cold, and a small sewing kit wrapped carefully in cloth. The woman held the girl's hand tightly, though her fingers had grown numb hours ago. The wind tugged at their coats as if urging them onward, away from warmth, away from the last familiar place they knew. No one watched them leave. Doors stayed shut. Curtains did not move. In a small town, silence could feel louder than shouting. The girl tried to walk bravely, matching her mother's steady pace, but her boots were too thin for such weather. Snow slipped through cracked seams and melted against her socks before freezing again. She said nothing about it. She had already learned that some hardships were easier carried quietly. Behind them, the town faded into pale shapes swallowed by drifting snow. Ahead stretched open land, fields buried beneath winter, fences half hidden, and hills rolling like frozen waves. The road was barely visible, only a faint depression where wagons once traveled before the storms came. The mother kept her eyes forward. She did not look back again. She had grown up not far from there, in a farmhouse that no longer stood. Hard years had taken many things from many people, and pride had taken the rest. Asking for help had never come easy to her, and lately it had stopped coming at all. What happened the night before still echoed in her ears, words spoken too loudly, doors slammed too hard, a final decision made without room for argument. By morning, she and her daughter were outside with the cold pressing in from every side. The girl finally spoke when the wind eased for a moment. "Where are we going?" The woman hesitated. She wished she had an answer that sounded certain. Instead, she squeezed the small hand in hers. "Somewhere warm," she said softly. They walked for hours. The sun rose weakly, offering light but no heat. Frost gathered along the edges of their scarves. Every breath burned their lungs. The land felt endless, and the quiet grew heavy enough to hear their own footsteps crunching through snow. By midday, the girl began to stumble. The woman noticed immediately and slowed their pace. She scanned the horizon, searching for anything that might offer shelter. A barn, a shed, even a cluster of trees thick enough to block the wind. But the plains gave little away. Then she saw it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a mound rising from the earth, half buried beneath snowdrifts. Just another hill shaped by wind. But something about it felt wrong, too round, too deliberate. A dark line cut across one side, barely visible against stone and frost. Hope can appear in strange forms when a person has nearly run out of it. She guided the girl toward the mound, each step faster despite her exhaustion. As they drew closer, the shape revealed itself. Stacked stones forming low walls, packed earth above them, and a wooden door set into the ground at an angle. Smoke stains marked the rocks near a rusted pipe that rose like a crooked finger into the sky. A root cellar. Old ones dotted the countryside, built decades earlier by families who stored potatoes, carrots, and preserves through long winters. Many had been abandoned when newer homes replaced older ways of living. Some collapsed. Others simply disappeared into the land. This one still stood. The door was stiff with ice. The woman pulled hard, shoulders straining until it groaned open. A breath of air rose from inside, cold but still, untouched by the biting wind outside. Darkness waited below, along with the faint smell of soil and aged wood. She helped the girl down the narrow steps first, careful with every movement. Inside, the cellar stretched wider than expected, its walls lined with rough shelves. Most stood empty, though a few broken crates remained in one corner. The earth floor was dry, the ceiling low but solid. Most important of all, the wind could not reach them there. The girl looked around with wide eyes. Can we stay?" The woman closed the door behind them, shutting out the white roar of winter. For the first time that day, silence felt safe. "We can rest." They sat together on an overturned crate. The girl leaned against her, shivering slowly, easing as the cellar held on to the earth's hidden warmth. The difference was small, but enough to matter, enough to keep hope alive for another hour. The woman examined the space carefully. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. Stones fitted tightly, ventilation pipe intact. Even an old iron hook hung from a beam, likely once used for lanterns. She imagined families coming here years ago, carrying baskets of vegetables, laughing despite hard seasons because preparation meant survival. She wondered what had become of them. From her sack, she pulled the blanket and wrapped it around her daughter. The child's eyelids drooped almost instantly, exhaustion claiming what courage had carried all morning. Within minutes, she slept. The woman did not. Instead, she listened. To the faint whistle of wind above, to the quiet creak of settling wood, to her own thoughts louder than anything else. Fear lingered, but alongside it came something unexpected, a small, stubborn idea forming slowly. This place could be more than shelter. She stood and walked the length of the cellar, measuring it with careful steps. She checked the walls for gaps, tested the shelves for strength, cleared debris from corners. Her hands moved automatically, guided by years of making do with little. She had sewn clothes from scraps, stretched meals through lean months, fixed broken furniture when replacement was impossible. Survival, she knew, often began with noticing what others overlooked. Near the back wall, she found a trapdoor half covered in dirt. It resisted at first, but eventually lifted, revealing a shallow storage pit beneath. Empty now, but dry and protected. Her mind raced with possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider since being forced out of town. If they could stay warm. If they could gather supplies? If no one drove them away. Above them, evening settled quickly. The temperature outside fell even further, the kind of cold that punished mistakes. Inside the cellar, darkness thickened until only faint light slipped through cracks around the door. The woman lit a small candle from her sewing kit, its glow fragile but steady. The girl stirred awake, blinking at the flicker. "Are we home?" she asked sleepily. The question struck deeper than expected. The woman looked around the rough stone walls, the dirt floor, the empty shelves waiting for purpose. It was not a home anyone would choose. Yet it was theirs for now, claimed by need and courage alone. "We might be," she said. That night, while the storm returned outside, she made quiet plans. Tomorrow they would search for fallen branches for fuel. She would reinforce the door. Maybe, if luck allowed, they could trade sewing work once they found a way back toward people without returning to the place that had cast them out. Piece by piece she imagined transforming the cellar. A sleeping corner, a cooking space, storage for food. Something stable, something built by their own hands. What she did not know was that their discovery would soon become the talk of the entire town, because winter reveals more than hardship. It reveals resilience people never expected to witness. And before long, someone would notice smoke rising from a hill that had been empty for years. The woman lay awake beside her daughter, listening as the wind howled overhead. For the first time since morning, she allowed herself to believe they might survive the season. Maybe even more than survive. Above them, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks completely, as if the world itself had decided to hide them. But hidden things rarely stay hidden forever. Somewhere beyond the frozen fields, a pair of eyes would soon spot that thin line of smoke curling into the pale winter sky, and with that discovery would come questions, judgment, and a chain of events neither mother nor child could yet imagine. And deep in the quiet of the root cellar, while the candle burned low and the storm tightened its grip on the land, the woman realized one unsettling truth. Finding the cellar had saved them from the cold. What they would build inside it might change everything. Morning arrived quietly beneath the earth. The woman woke before the girl, her eyes opening to darkness softened by a thin gray light slipping through the cracks around the cellar door. For a moment she forgot where they were. Then the smell of soil and cold stone returned, along with the steady silence that only deep winter carried. Her back ached from sleeping on the hard floor, but the air felt warmer than outside, and that alone gave her strength. Beside her, the girl slept curled tightly beneath the blanket, cheeks flushed with returning color. The sight eased something heavy in the woman's chest. Last night had been about survival. Today would have to be about living. She pushed herself up and rubbed her hands together to wake feeling back into them. Every small movement sent tiny clouds of breath into the dim air. The cellar held warmth compared to the open plains, but winter still lingered in every corner. Carefully, she opened the door just enough to look outside. Snow had buried the land deeper overnight. The sky hung low and pale, and the wind had calmed into a slow, drifting whisper. Their footprints were gone, erased completely. The hill looked untouched, as if no one had come there in years. That both comforted and frightened her. If no one knew they were there, they were safe for now. But it also meant no help would come if things went wrong. She stepped outside briefly, gathering her bearings. The plain stretched wide and empty, fences barely visible beneath drifts. In the distance, a line of dark trees marked a creek bed she remembered from childhood journeys across the area. If the creek still ran beneath the ice, they might have water. If not, snow would have to do. She gathered small branches sticking out from drifts, snapping them carefully. Each piece felt like a promise of another warm hour. Her fingers stung with cold before she returned inside and shut the door firmly. The girl woke soon after, blinking at the light. "Did we make it through the night?" she asked. "We did," the woman said, smiling faintly. They shared the last of the bread slowly, chewing longer than necessary to make it last. Hunger had a way of sharpening gratitude. The girl asked questions between bites, the kind only a child could ask after hardship without bitterness. "Who built this place?" "Farmers, most likely," the woman replied. "People who planned ahead," the girl nodded thoughtfully, as if storing that idea somewhere important. After eating, they began working. The woman believed movement kept fear from settling too deeply. She cleared dust from shelves while the girl gathered loose stones into neat piles. Together they transformed the cellar little by little. It was not much, but order brought comfort. As she worked, memories returned uninvited. She remembered arriving in town years earlier with hope tucked into every plan. The town had been small but welcoming then, full of people who depended on one another through harsh seasons. She earned her place slowly, mending clothes, fixing torn coats, helping neighbors prepare for winters just like this one. Life had not been easy, but it had been steady. Things changed after the bad harvest 2 years ago. Crops failed across the region, money grew scarce. People who once shared freely began holding tighter to what they had. Suspicion replaced kindness. Small disagreements turned into lasting grudges. And when hardship deepens, someone often becomes the blame. She had felt the shift long before the night they were forced out. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Work requests slowed, whispers followed her daughter at school. She never fully understood why resentment settled on them, only that once it started, it grew quickly. The girl interrupted her thoughts. "Do you think they miss us?" The question landed softly but carried weight. The woman paused before answering. "I think people worry about their own troubles first." The girl accepted that answer without pressing further, though her eyes drifted toward the closed door as if expecting someone to appear. By midday, the cellar looked different. One corner held their sleeping space. Another became a small work area where the woman laid out her sewing kit. She examined each needle carefully, each thread saved through careful use. Skills were sometimes more valuable than supplies. Outside, faint sounds carried through the frozen air. At first she thought it was the wind shifting direction. Then she heard it again, distant but clear. The creak of wagon wheels. She froze. The girl noticed immediately. "What is it?" "Quiet," the woman whispered. They listened together. The sound passed slowly somewhere beyond the hill, too far to see but close enough to remind her that the world had not forgotten this land. Travelers still moved. Life continued beyond their hidden shelter. Relief mixed with worry. If others came near, would they be welcomed or chased away again? The sound faded, leaving silence heavier than before. That afternoon they walked cautiously toward the creek line. The woman marked their path carefully using broken twigs placed upright in the snow. Losing direction in such weather could mean disaster. The girl followed closely, stepping in her mother's footprints. The creek still lived beneath ice. She broke a thin section carefully, filling the tin cup with freezing water. It felt like finding treasure. Nearby she spotted animal tracks, small and clustered, rabbits perhaps. Signs that life endured even through the worst cold. On their way back, the girl pointed toward the horizon. A thin column of smoke rose far away. "Someone else lives out here," she said. The woman nodded but felt uneasy. Isolation had protected them so far. Being noticed could change everything. Back at the cellar, she reinforced the door using a loose plank found inside. She packed snow along the edges to block drafts and arranged branches for a small controlled fire near the ventilation pipe. Smoke escaped properly, just as the builder intended decades earlier. Warmth slowly filled the space. That evening felt almost peaceful. The girl laughed for the first time since leaving town, amused by shadows dancing along the stone walls. The sound startled the woman. She had forgotten how laughter changed a place, turning shelter into something closer to home, but peace never stayed long without challenge. As night deepened, faint footsteps sounded above. Not many, just one or two slow crunches in the snow. The woman extinguished the fire instantly, plunging the cellar into darkness. She pulled the girl close, pressing a hand gently over her mouth to keep silence. Her heart pounded loud, enough she feared it could be heard through the ground. The footsteps paused directly overhead, snow shifted. A faint scraping noise followed, as if someone tested the earth with a boot. Minutes stretched endlessly. Whoever stood above did not speak. No lantern light appeared through the cracks. Only stillness remained, heavy with uncertainty. Eventually the footsteps moved away, fading into distance. The woman waited long after the sound disappeared before lighting the candle again. Her hands trembled slightly. "Who was it?" the girl whispered. "I don't know." That answer frightened her more than anything else. Sleep came slowly that night. Every small noise felt louder. Every gust of wind sounded like returning steps. The woman realized their hidden refuge might already be discovered, and discovery meant decisions from people whose intentions she could not predict. Morning brought fresh snow again, covering any tracks that might reveal who had come. She searched outside carefully, but found nothing certain. Only smooth white ground and endless quiet. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. Over the next days, they settled into rhythm, gathering wood. Melting snow, repairing shelves. The woman began sewing patches onto their worn clothing, then experimented with scraps to create small useful items, mittens stitched from leftover fabric, a pouch for carrying water, padding for boots. Work steadied her thoughts. The girl explored near the hill, always within sight, collecting smooth stones she claimed were lucky. She spoke often about what the cellar might become once winter ended. A garden outside, chickens maybe, a place where travelers could rest. The woman listened, half hopeful, half afraid to imagine too far ahead. One afternoon, while arranging firewood, she noticed something new near the horizon. Smoke, not far away this time. It rose thin and steady from somewhere beyond the ridge, closer than before. Someone had built a fire nearby, and judging by its consistency, it was not temporary. They were no longer alone in the winter landscape. That night she lay awake again, thoughts turning over endlessly. Was the visitor from before connected to the smoke? Were they being observed out of curiosity or suspicion? In small communities, strangers rarely remained unnoticed for long. The girl slept peacefully, trusting the world more easily. Outside, wind carried distant sounds she could not fully place, a dog barking far away. Metal striking metal once, faint but unmistakable. Signs of life moving closer. The woman understood something then. The root cellar had saved them from freezing, but survival would now depend on choices she had avoided making. Staying hidden might no longer be possible, yet stepping back toward people meant risking rejection all over again. As the candle burned low, she stared at the wooden door, aware that beyond it lay both danger and opportunity. Somewhere in the darkness outside, someone else was awake, watching the same winter sky, perhaps wondering about the thin line of smoke rising from a hill that had once been empty. And sooner or later, one of them would decide to come closer. The smoke on the horizon did not disappear the next morning. It rose steady and pale against the winter sky, thin enough to be missed by anyone who was not looking carefully. The woman stood outside the root cellar, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching it drift upward and dissolve into the cold air. Whoever built that fire knew how to keep it controlled, low, and hidden from distance. That meant experience. It meant intention. The girl stepped beside her, boots crunching softly in the snow. "Are they close?" "Closer than before," the woman answered. She tried to sound calm, but her thoughts moved quickly. Someone living nearby changed everything. Until now, survival depended only on weather and supplies. Now it depended on people, and people were far less predictable than winter. They returned inside and shut the heavy door. The cellar felt smaller than it had days earlier. Every shadow seemed to carry questions. The woman added wood carefully to the fire, keeping the flame low enough to avoid drawing too much attention while still warming the space. The girl sat near the shelves, arranging her collected stones into neat rows. She had begun naming them quietly, assigning stories to each one. A habit formed from loneliness, though she never admitted it. "Maybe they're nice," the girl said after a while. "Maybe," the woman replied, threading a needle. She worked on repairing a torn mitten, fingers moving automatically. Sewing calmed her mind, giving shape to thoughts that otherwise felt tangled. She remembered winters long ago when neighbors gathered together to mend and share food. Back then, smoke rising from a chimney meant welcome. Now it meant uncertainty. That afternoon, the wind shifted direction, carrying faint sounds across the plains. Voices, distant but real. The woman stiffened, listening carefully. She could not make out words, only tones rising and falling before fading again, more than one person. She extinguished the fire again, waiting in silence. Minutes passed. Nothing approached the hill. Still, her heartbeat refused to slow. The girl watched her closely. "Are we hiding?" "For now," the woman said gently. The answer felt heavier than she expected. Hiding was not living, yet stepping forward required trust she was not sure she still possessed. Later that day, while gathering wood near the creek, she noticed fresh tracks in the snow. Larger than rabbit tracks, boots, recent ones. They led along the ridge but did not approach the cellar directly. Whoever walked there had either not noticed the hill or chosen not to investigate. She followed the tracks only a short distance before stopping herself. Curiosity could become danger quickly. She returned to the cellar with her arms full of branches and her thoughts unsettled. Inside, the girl had discovered something tucked behind a loose stone in the wall. A small glass jar sealed with wax, forgotten by whoever once owned the cellar. Inside rested shriveled seeds, dark and fragile. "Look what I found," the girl said proudly. The woman turned the jar in her hands, studying it carefully. Seeds meant planning for spring. Someone had believed they would return here one day. The realization filled her with quiet respect for the unknown builder. "Maybe we can plant them?" the girl suggested. "Maybe," she said, though spring felt impossibly far away. That night, the footsteps returned. This time they stopped closer to the door. Snow compressed slowly above them. A faint shadow crossed the thin line of light at the bottom of the entrance. The woman motioned for silence, her body tense as she listened. A knock came, soft but unmistakable. Not loud enough to break the door, just enough to announce presence. Neither of them moved. Another knock followed, then a pause. A man's voice spoke through the wood, muffled by earth and winter air. "I know someone's in there," he said calmly. "Smoke travels farther than folks think," the woman's breath caught. The girl gripped her sleeve tightly. The voice continued. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just checking who's using old ground." Silence stretched. The woman's mind raced through possibilities. Opening the door could mean help or harm. Staying quiet could provoke suspicion. She finally answered without moving closer. "We mean no harm." A pause followed, long enough for doubt to grow. "Well," the voice said slowly, harm usually says the same thing. Despite herself, she almost smiled at that. "I've got a cabin beyond the ridge," he added. "Been seeing smoke here a few days. Thought the place collapsed years ago." She said nothing more. Trust did not arrive in a single moment. After waiting, the footsteps retreated. Snow crunched steadily until silence returned once again. The girl whispered, "Why didn't you open it?" The woman struggled to explain something even she barely understood. Because once people see you, things change. The girl considered that quietly. Sleep came uneasy that night. The woman kept waking, listening for returning steps. None came, yet the knowledge of being discovered settled heavily over her thoughts. Morning revealed new tracks leading away from the hill, confirming the visitor had left peacefully. Still, the encounter shifted something inside her. Isolation was ending whether she wanted it or not. Over the following days, signs of nearby life increased. Smoke appeared regularly beyond the ridge. Once, she spotted a distant figure moving slowly across the snow with a sled behind him. Another time, she heard a dog barking closer than before. The world pressed inward. Meanwhile, their own routines deepened. The woman began sewing items not only for survival but with purpose. Thick mittens, patched scarves, reinforced boot linings. She imagined trading them someday, though she had no market yet. The girl created a small corner she called their kitchen, arranging stones as pretend cookware while humming songs remembered from warmer days. Her resilience amazed the woman. Children adapted faster than adults, bending around hardship rather than fighting it. One evening, while checking the ventilation pipe outside, the woman noticed something placed near the door. A bundle wrapped in cloth. Her heart pounded as she approached carefully. Inside she found dried meat, a small sack of flour, and a note written in rough handwriting. Winter's long. No sense starving, no name, no demand, only that simple message. She looked toward the ridge but saw no one watching. Inside, the girl's eyes widened at the food. Is it from the man? Most likely. Does that mean he's kind? The woman hesitated again. Kindness sometimes carried expectations. Yet leaving food without forcing conversation felt respectful. They cooked carefully that night, the smell filling the cellar with warmth deeper than fire alone. Gratitude mixed with caution. Whoever lived nearby had chosen generosity, but motives remained unknown. Days passed and tension shifted into something more complex. The woman found herself watching the ridge each morning, half expecting the stranger to return. Part of her wanted answers. Another part feared what those answers might bring. One afternoon, while exploring farther along the creek, the girl discovered an old fence line buried under snow. Beyond it lay abandoned farmland, collapsed barns barely visible. The woman recognized the area suddenly. Years ago, families farmed there before drought and debt forced them away. The land held stories of survival and loss much like their own. As they walked back, distant voices echoed again, louder this time. She pulled the girl behind a cluster of trees and watched carefully. Two men moved across the ridge carrying tools. One pointed toward the hill, toward their hill. They spoke briefly before continuing on. Her stomach tightened. Word was spreading. That evening she sat by the fire long after the girl slept, turning the stranger's note over in her hands. Accepting help meant connection. Connection meant visibility. Visibility meant the town might soon learn where they were. And the town had not treated them kindly before. Outside, the sky darkened into deep blue, stars sharp against the cold. Smoke from their chimney blended with smoke from the distant cabin, two thin signals rising into the same winter night. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the stranger likely sat beside his own fire, perhaps wondering about the people inside the cellar just as she wondered about him. Trust hovered between them like fragile ice. The woman realized the true conflict was no longer just surviving winter. It was deciding whether to remain hidden from a world that had rejected them or risk stepping back into it, piece by uncertain piece. As the fire burned low, a new sound drifted through the night. Not footsteps this time, but multiple voices approaching from different directions, faint yet unmistakable. More people were coming. And she understood with growing certainty that the root cellar was no longer a secret. The voices did not fade with the night. They carried across the frozen fields, rising and falling with the wind, sometimes clear enough to recognize laughter, other times swallowed by distance. The woman sat upright beside the small fire, every sense alert. The girl slept beside her, unaware of how quickly their quiet world was changing. By morning, fresh tracks surrounded the hill. Not close enough to suggest intrusion, but near enough to show curiosity. Boot prints crossed the ridge, circled once, then continued toward the creek. Someone had even paused near the ventilation pipe, leaving a shallow impression in the snow. The woman stood outside studying them, her breath slow and controlled. This was no longer one stranger checking on Smoke. Several people now knew someone lived here. The girl stepped out behind her, pulling her coat tighter. "Are they coming back?" "They might," the woman said. The answer felt heavier than before. The cellar had transformed from refuge into question. Every improvement they made now risked being seen, judged, or taken away. Inside, she began preparing as if visitors were certain. She cleaned the shelves, folded blankets neatly, and swept the dirt floor using bundled twigs. It was not vanity, it was dignity. If people came, she wanted them to see effort instead of desperation. The girl helped eagerly, humming while arranging stones along the wall like decorations. She seemed almost excited by the possibility of meeting others again. Children, the woman thought, still believed meetings ended well. That afternoon, a shadow appeared at the top of the hill. The same man's voice called gently before approaching. "It's me again." Brought something useful. The woman hesitated only a moment this time before opening the door halfway. Cold air rushed inside along with daylight. The man stood several steps away, giving space. He carried a small wooden crate and wore a heavy coat patched many times over. His face showed age shaped by weather rather than years alone. His eyes held caution but no hostility. "I figured you might need tools," he said, setting the crate down and stepping back. Inside were simple things: a small hammer, nails, a tin lantern, and a bundle of candles. The woman looked at him carefully. "Why help us?" He shrugged lightly. "Winter's hard enough without pretending we don't need each other." The words lingered between them. He introduced himself only by saying he lived beyond the ridge in an old trapping cabin. No questions pressed too deeply, no demands made. He glanced at the hill, the smoke pipe, the reinforced door. "You've done good work here," he added. The girl peeked from behind her mother, curiosity winning over fear. He smiled gently and tipped his hat before stepping away again. Before leaving, he said something that tightened the woman's chest. "Townfolk have been talking. Some think squatters moved into abandoned land. Others just wonder who survived this cold." Her grip on the door tightened. "Are they coming?" "Some might," he admitted. Curiosity travels faster than kindness. After he left, silence returned but felt different. The outside world was no longer distant rumor. It was moving toward them. Over the next few days, tension built steadily. More tracks appeared. Once, a pair of riders passed far enough away to avoid direct contact but close enough to confirm attention. Smoke from their cellar now felt like a signal flare they could not extinguish without freezing. The woman debated reducing the fire entirely, but the girl's comfort stopped her. Survival still mattered more than secrecy. Meanwhile, the cellar continued changing. Using the tools, she strengthened shelves and repaired weak stones near the entrance. The place began to resemble a true dwelling rather than temporary shelter. Warmth gathered more easily. Organization replaced chaos. With each improvement, hope grew alongside fear. One evening, the stranger returned with news. "They're organizing a visit," he said quietly. Not angry, just curious. "Folks remember families using these hills long ago. Some think you might be trying to claim land?" The woman felt heat rise to her face. "We're only surviving." "I know," he said. "But towns worry when they don't understand something." He paused before adding, "You could leave before they come." The suggestion lingered heavily. Leaving meant safety from judgment, but also returning to uncertainty and exposure to deadly cold. Staying meant facing people who had once turned away from them. After he left, the woman sat long into the night considering both paths. The girl noticed her silence. "Are we moving again?" she asked softly. "I don't know," the woman admitted. The girl hugged her tightly. "I like it here." Those simple words carried weight greater than argument. For the first time since being forced out, the girl had begun to feel secure again. Taking that away felt like another loss neither of them could bear. The following morning brought heavy clouds and rising wind. A storm approached, the kind that erased roads and trapped travelers indoors. Snow began falling before noon, thick and relentless. By evening, visibility vanished entirely. Then came the sound of bells. Faint at first, then clearer. sleigh bells cutting through the storm. The woman opened the door slightly despite the blowing snow. Shapes moved through the white curtain, lanterns glowing dimly. Several figures approached slowly, guiding horses carefully toward the hill. The town had arrived sooner than expected. She closed the door and turned to the girl. "Stay behind me." Her voice remained calm, though her hands trembled. Knocking came moments later, firmer than before but not hostile. "We know you're inside," a woman's voice called through the storm. "We just want to talk." The mother hesitated. Every memory of rejection pressed against her decision, yet hiding now would only deepen suspicion. She opened the door. Cold wind rushed in along with faces half covered in scarves. 4 townspeople stood outside, lantern light flickering across their expressions. Some looked curious, others uncertain, none openly cruel. Their eyes moved past her into the cellar, taking in shelves, blankets, firelight, and the child standing quietly behind. "You've been living here?" one man asked, surprise clear in his tone. "Yes," she answered simply. A long silence followed as snow swirled around them. "We thought the place abandoned," another said. Then folks started seeing smoke. The woman waited for accusation, for demands to leave. Instead, questions came slowly. How long had they been there? Were they managing through the cold? Did they need supplies? The conversation felt fragile, balanced between concern and caution. Yet beneath it all lay tension unspoken. Old judgments lingered. She recognized one face from town, someone who once refused her work months earlier. Their eyes met briefly before looking away. The storm intensified, forcing everyone closer to the doorway. Wind howled across the plains, making further travel impossible. "Mind if we step in a moment?" the woman outside asked. Storms worse than expected. The request hung heavy in the air. Allowing them inside meant fully revealing their life here. Refusing might confirm fears or resentment. After a long breath, she stepped aside. They entered carefully, stamping snow from boots, lantern light filling the cellar with new energy. The space felt suddenly crowded, alive with voices and shifting shadows. The girl watched quietly, clutching her lucky stones. Conversations began cautiously. Someone admired the repairs. Another commented on how warm the cellar felt. Questions mixed with praise, yet uncertainty remained beneath every word. Outside, the storm raged harder, sealing them together beneath the earth. The woman realized this moment balanced everything. Acceptance or rejection could come from what happened next. Every choice, every word mattered. As wind shook the door and snow piled higher above, one of the visitors turned toward her with a thoughtful expression. "We didn't expect to find something like this," he said slowly. "Truth is, people are wondering what you plan to do here." The question carried more weight than its calm tone suggested. The girl looked up at her mother, waiting for the answer. The fire crackled softly, shadows dancing across stone walls that had sheltered them through the coldest days. Outside, the storm reached its fiercest point, trapping everyone together while tension filled the small space. The woman drew a breath, knowing whatever she said next could change not only their future, but how the town would see them forever. And for a moment, before words came, silence held the entire cellar still. The woman felt every pair of eyes resting on her as the fire crackled between them. The storm outside roared louder, pressing snow against the cellar door, sealing the small space from the rest of the world. For a moment, she thought about all the paths that had led here, the long walk through freezing wind, the fear of the first night, the quiet rebuilding of hope piece by piece beneath the earth. She looked at her daughter first. The girl stood close, watching with complete trust, as if the answer already existed and only needed to be spoken aloud. That trust gave the woman courage she had not felt in a long time. "We plan to live," she said simply. "That's all we've been trying to do." The words settled gently but firmly in the room. One of the visitors, an older woman wrapped in a thick wool coat, nodded slowly. "No one can argue with that." Another man shifted uncomfortably. "Folks in town worried you might be claiming land or hiding from something?" The woman met his gaze calmly. "We're not hiding from the law. Just trying to survive the winter." Silence followed again, but this time it felt less sharp. The townspeople looked around more carefully, noticing the repaired shelves, the organized supplies, the sewing work laid neatly in one corner. Evidence of effort spoke louder than explanation. The stranger from beyond the ridge stepped forward slightly. "They've worked hard here," he said. "Didn't ask anyone for trouble." His voice carried quiet authority, and the others listened. The older woman walked slowly along the wall, touching the stone lightly. "My grandparents used cellars like this," she said. "Stored food through winters worse than this one. Takes patience to keep one standing." The girl brightened. "We found seeds too," she said, rushing to show the glass jar. "For spring." The visitors exchanged glances, something softening in their expressions. The idea of spring felt powerful after such a harsh season. Outside, wind battered the hill harder, forcing everyone to remain inside longer than expected. Lantern light mixed with firelight and conversation slowly replaced tension. Someone shared news from town, broken fences, frozen wells, livestock lost to cold. Hardship had touched everyone, not just those forced into the cellar. The woman listened quietly, realizing something important. The town had struggled too. Fear and scarcity had changed people, just as it had changed her. After a while, the man who first spoke cleared his throat. "Truth is, some folks regret how things went before," he said carefully, not meeting her eyes at first. "Times got tight. People made decisions they might do differently now." The apology was not direct, but its meaning was clear. The woman felt old hurt stir inside her, memories of closed doors and whispered blame. For a moment she considered holding on to that pain. It would have been easy. Yet she looked around at tired faces, frostbitten hands, people shaped by the same winter that nearly took her and her child. Hard seasons did not excuse everything, but they explained much. "We all did what we thought we had to," she said quietly. Relief passed through the group like warmth. The storm continued deep into the night, leaving no choice but to share the cellar longer. Someone brewed tea using melted snow. Another repaired a loose hinge using the tools she had received days earlier. Laughter began appearing between conversations, hesitant at first, then natural. The girl sat beside the older woman, listening to stories about winters long past, about communities surviving by sharing work and food. Her eyes shone with fascination. As hours passed, the cellar no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a gathering space. By morning, the storm finally weakened. When the door opened, sunlight reflected off fresh snow so bright it almost hurt to look at. The landscape had changed overnight, smooth and untouched except for the path they would now make together back toward town. Before leaving, the townspeople paused outside the cellar, studying the hill with new understanding. One man spoke thoughtfully. "You turned an abandoned root cellar into a home." The woman glanced at her daughter, then at the repaired door and rising smoke pipe. "We just used what we found." "That's more than most would manage," he replied. They invited her to return with them, offering a place in town again, work repairing clothes, help rebuilding stability. The offer surprised her. Weeks earlier, such kindness felt impossible. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question of her own. "What if we stayed here?" The group looked at one another. "The cellar works," she continued. "And come spring, we could grow food, maybe even help travelers crossing the plains. This place could serve more than just us." The idea settled slowly, then began to take shape in their minds, a stopping place, a shared shelter, a reminder of older ways when communities depended on preparation and cooperation. The older woman smiled. "A winter refuge," she said. "We haven't had one of those in years?" The stranger from the ridge nodded approvingly. "Good ground for it." Over the following weeks, change came steadily. Townspeople returned not with suspicion but with supplies. Extra boards, seeds, a proper stovepipe. Someone repaired the ventilation system fully. Another reinforced the door against storms. The woman traded sewing work for materials, her skill quickly becoming valued again. Travelers passing through began stopping at the hill, drawn by smoke and welcome rather than mystery. The girl helped plant the first garden rows when the snow finally melted. The seeds from the jar sprouted slowly, tiny green shoots pushing through dark soil, proof that patience survived even the hardest winter. Word spread beyond the town about the root cellar that saved a mother and daughter at 30 below. People came not just out of curiosity, but inspiration. Many left small gifts behind, a sack of potatoes, a bundle of firewood, handwritten notes wishing them well. The cellar became known as a place where no traveler was turned away during storms. Spring brought color back to the plains. Grass replaced snow. The creek flowed freely again. Birds returned, their songs filling mornings once ruled by silence. One evening, as golden light stretched across the fields, the woman sat outside watching her daughter laugh with children visiting from town. The sound felt different now, lighter, free from fear. The stranger from the ridge approached, carrying fresh lumber. "Looks like you built something bigger than a shelter," he said. She followed his gaze toward the cellar, now surrounded by a small garden, stacked firewood, and a bench where travelers rested. "We didn't build it alone," she replied. He smiled. "That's usually how lasting things happen." She realized then that the greatest change was not the cellar itself, but the bridge rebuilt between people. Hardship had separated them once, but shared effort brought them back together stronger. Later that night, she tucked her daughter into bed inside the warm cellar. The girl looked up sleepily. "Are we home now?" The woman looked around at stone walls glowing softly in lantern light, at shelves filled with food grown from rescued seeds, at tools hanging ready for tomorrow's work. "Yes," she said with certainty. "We are." Outside, smoke rose steadily into a calm sky, no longer a signal of desperation but a sign of welcome. Travelers would see it from miles away, and no warmth waited beneath the hill. The winter that nearly broke them had instead revealed resilience, kindness, and the quiet strength of rebuilding trust. The root cellar, once forgotten, had become proof that even in the harshest cold, people could create something lasting when they chose compassion over fear. And long after that winter passed into memory, townsfolk would still tell the story of the mother and daughter thrown out into 30 below who found shelter beneath the earth and built a place that brought an entire community back together.